Well, joining me now for more on the budget deal that's expected to reopen the U.S. government and avert a federal default are Jack Burkman, a Republican consultant, and Gabe Roth, a Democratic consultant. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Jack, let me start with you. Has this hurt the Republican Party?
Well, yes, I think it'll hurt it a lot. I'm still hoping John Boehner has the guts and the conservatives can band together and defeat this thing in the House. I mean, I think the only way to have ever enforced budget discipline in this country was to have a shutdown. I mean, I suppose my opponent would argue, and I guess the president would argue that, well, there will be short-term carnage from a budget default, therefore we can't default. But would they come in and argue the same thing next year, the year after, 5 years from now, and 10 years after? Probably they will, in which case the U.S. would become Italy. So I'm not sure this logic, the media is cheerleading this thing where, oh, a default is terrible, but what's more terrible is this encroachment toward America becoming a Southern European country.
Okay.
Well, I mean, on this issue, I really listened to the people in the business community, the leaders of the banks and leaders of the fiscal world saying that a default would be catastrophic, not only for the United States economy, but for the world economy. So that's who I'm going to trust. But it's very clear that this is an issue where the leader of the Republican Party in the House, John Boehner, has no control over his caucus. It's a fractured and extremist caucus that he's sort of going back and forth between two sides of. And he talks about fiscal discipline, but I think the discipline that's needed is for John Boehner to keep the moderates in line and not always kowtow to the extremists who want to essentially take down the government.
Okay, there's a bit of a blame game going on here right now, and who's to blame for this. Let's look at the president. Does he come out of this looking, or rather smelling like roses, or did he blunder by saying at the outset, I'm not going to negotiate on this?
No, he's coming out of it like roses. I'd be the first to say that. Now, I think what I advised Boehner to do was hold out, because I think if the equity markets crash, and I think they would if somehow the House didn't vote for this, the equity markets over the next 30 days would crash, and then I think Obama would be forced to negotiate. Somehow, Boehner lost his nerve through this process. He had his nerve all the way through, but now is just buckling under to pressure from the Senate and the media.
Did he lose his nerve, or was he just facing reality? We've been told over and over again over the last few days of the dire consequences a default would have, not just on the U.S. economy.
But again, and I throw this out, this was what I was hoping my distinguished opponent would address. There is short-term carnage, sure, like you say, the business community says that. But what about the longer-term picture? The Democrats won't speak to that. Will you come back next year and say, I want to raise the debt ceiling next year and the year after and the year after? If you do, it would seem to me that there's a lot more carnage and devastation coming from that than anything that would come from this year, right? Or wrong?
Well, I think,
well, just before you go, and we're just getting some news here that the Senate has passed the second part of that vote. That took place just a few seconds ago. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that when you look at the larger picture, the long-term picture, I mean, raising the debt ceiling, that's just paying for bills that we've already incurred. Right. So it shouldn't really be an issue. When you talk about the long-term success of the fiscal health of the United States, my opponent's right. There are things that I think the Republicans and Democrats over the long term can agree on, whether it's immigration reform, which will save us money in the long term, or possibly entitlement reform, which will save money, or corporate tax reform, where you maybe lower the rates but cut a lot of the loopholes. I think there are things that the moderates in both parties can agree on. It's just that when you talk about Congress, there's nobody for the Democrats really to negotiate with, because the Republicans keep talking them into negotiating with themselves.
See, the question is, it's kind of it's a non-response. It's a non-answer, because the question I asked was, will you come back next year and say you want to raise the debt ceiling again? And he's already decided the answer is yes, he will. And will you come back 2 years from now and say you want to raise the debt ceiling? He's already decided yes, he will.
Well, it's
and
a
that's
matter
the issue
of helping the health of the economy. Not needing to raise the debt ceiling is we need to get revenues in line.
What happens if we go 10 years out and do that? So we raise the debt ceiling for the next 10 years, then where are we? We're called Italy, Portugal, right?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
Why not? It's fairly.
Well, why not?
It's fairly clear that.
No answer.
Okay. The debt ceiling is not a symptom of this whole issue. The problem is not that this arbitrary number that exists that's been raised 100 times in the last 30 years needs to keep being raised. It's a silly thing to be arguing over. The real issue is trying to find people in both houses of Congress, and we obviously have that on the Democratic side, who are willing to negotiate about the long-term fiscal health of the economy, and the Republicans would much rather burn down the House than sit across the table from the Democrats.
You see the non-answer. You see the non-response.
I think the Republicans also looked at this from a political point of view. I mean, if we hear from Lindsey Graham, who said, we really did go too far, we screwed up here.
Well, Graham's a kind of moderate. He's never been a deficit hawk. Lindsey Graham's a moderate. I mean, he's in the wing of the party that believes that. There's short-term political loss from doing this. But again, even guys like Paul Ryan are getting afraid of the media. But the reality is if you really want to fight for the things Paul Ryan was fighting for during the campaign, if you really want to start doing things with entitlements, if you're really worried about all these time bombs that are sitting there for deficit spending, the time is now to take action. I know that the Democratic talking points for next year are already written. Come August, they're going to come out in the media and CNN and all the rest. They're going to say, we got to start this campaign to raise the debt ceiling. They're going to do it again.
Then how do you raise the revenues with... How do you raise revenues?
You cut spending. You just start. We have to start.
It's got to be a balanced approach.
You cut spending, and we already cut spending. You're going to raise taxes too, right?
We've had drastic tax increases this year.
Right?
Are you going to raise? Had drastic tax.
Are you going to raise taxes on Social Security?
I mean, I'm not a millionaire, so I haven't seen my taxes go up. I've seen my taxes go down. So
I think you have to raise the retirement age. I mean, we can have that debate another day. There's a number of things that have to be done, should be done immediately to both Social Security and Medicare. There's other things that have to be done in discretionary spending. There's a plethora of things that have to be done, but nobody's doing them. It's just my argument is the only way to get any of these things done is to have the leverage of a closed government. If you don't have the leverage of a closed government, Obama's just going to be indifferent to this because he'll raise the top bracket to 60%.
Let's look at something else, and that is the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare as it's also known. This was an attempt by the Republican Party to gut that law. It is law, and they used the debt ceiling to do that, didn't they?
Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's a little bit off the point. It's probably not the tact I would have taken, but I think it's a good, that's another money saver. It's another thing that would be healthy for the economy. I mean, both parties have used the appropriations process to affect substantive change. Nothing new about that. I mean, that's gone on for 150 or more years in the U.S. Nothing surprising there to do.
Well, what's surprising is that the Republicans insist on making it harder for people who need health care to get health care. You want to lower health care costs, stop having the emergency room as the main source of health care for low-income families across the country. Having, opening Medicaid, having, expanding Medicaid in the states, having an insurance marketplace that the Heritage Foundation, one of the most conservative groups in the country, came up with 20 years ago and is now backing away from. That's the way to get healthcare costs down. The Affordable Care Act will save money in the long term, and there's really no question about that.
We can debate. I mean, you can get into another debate on healthcare. That's another. I don't know if you want to launch into the health. We can re-debate the health reform act.
We don't want to go there again. It's law right now.
But I think
that's a good point. It's law.
It's law right now. One of the other things I want to get to is about the politics of this. Gabe, the Democrats also played politics with this, didn't they?
I mean, admittedly, that is part of the game.
I mean, there were some bills which were on the table, which the Senate could have passed to, say, finance things like the Veterans Administration, and they didn't do it.
Well, I think that was a cynical attempt to sort of pick and choose the parts of the government that poll well or may work well with certain constituencies. But we need the whole government open. I mean, it's not just the veterans and the seniors benefits and women and infant, the WIC benefits, and the national parks, and I could go on for days. I think it's the whole government that needs to be open and functioning, and not just these random parts of the GOP.
We all live here in Washington, D.C. The government's been closed for 2 weeks. Has it impacted your life? Has it impacted your life? Has it impacted my life? Has
your trash wasn't going to get collected next week if the government was closed.
The Democrats had better, I say this half tongue-in-cheek, but the Democrats had better be careful, because they'll wake up and realize one day that the American people will realize and come to feel that they don't need 80% of what we call government.
Gentlemen, we're going to come back to you right now, but there are senators speaking right now. That second vote, as I mentioned, has passed. Here's Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, Democratic senator, talking right now. Let's listen in.
Credit, and in the United States itself, around the world, was shaken. So this is not a happy day. It's a somber day. Because at the end of the day, we never should have gone through what we went through. We started here, we ended here. Second point, there are 3 people, I think, who I'd like to praise. We can't do it enough. The first, of course, is our leader, Harry Reid. He stood so firm from the beginning. It was his resolve. We could not bow to the kind of tactics that were being used by the small minority on the other side. He was stalwart. He never buckled. He never flinched. He never doubted. He gave strength to the rest of us. and the whole caucus was united behind him. Second, I'd like to praise the President. The President, again, in every time that we saw him, and every time that we dealt with him, was stalwart from the beginning, realizing that the kind of tactics, if used by the other side, and permitted to be used by the other side, would be used again and again and again. And finally, my hat goes off to Senator McConnell. He's in a very difficult situation politically. And once he saw that Speaker Boehner and the House were tied in a total knot, he knew he had the obligation to step up, even if it might hurt him in his campaign. I respect that. I think every one of my Democratic colleagues respects that. And it's something that I'll remember. Final point. If there's a silver lining in this gray cloud, it is that the politics, the reckless politics of brinksmanship has reached its peak. That is what we hope, and that is what I believe. It was shown that brinksmanship doesn't work if the other side will not give in. When a small faction says that I'm going to hurt a whole lot of people unless you give in to me, the temptation of good-hearted, good-minded people is to give in because innocent people are being hurt. But unfortunately, if we gave in this time, we'd be back doing the same thing next quarter, and the quarter after that, and the quarter after that, and the brinksmanship would get worse. The kind of politics where they put a gun to your head and say, unless you do what I want to do, what I want you to do, I'm going to hurt a whole lot of people. And yet, tonight in the Senate, and hopefully in the House, a large group of the other party for the first time stood up to the brinksmanship. And it is our hope, indeed it's our prayer, that that brinksmanship has reached its peak, and that we can go back to the normal way of legislating, where every side compromises and we produce a product that is good for the American people. With Patty's leadership, I'm hopeful that can start in the budget negotiations, which will start immediately. I'm hopeful it could occur in the House on immigration, and I'm hopeful it could occur in both bodies on the major issues facing us. If brinksmanship has peaked, if the kind of politics we have unfortunately witnessed over the last several years recedes, and a politics of comity and compromise starts rising, then maybe these awful 3 weeks would have been worth it.
Senator Murray.
Well, tonight I am delighted to join this leadership team who has worked so hard, and my hat's off to Senator Reid for his tremendous work and passion, as well as my colleagues, Senator Schumer and Durbin, who never gave up, who stood up for our families and communities that are hurting, and tonight we join with all of them, breathing a sigh of relief. It took far too long. Far too many families were hurt while we worked to end this crisis, but there's finally a light at the end of the tunnel. Here in the Senate, as you saw tonight, Democrats and Republicans worked together on a path out of this crisis. Doesn't solve every problem today, but the path we are on will now open the government, take the threat of default off the table, and allow Democrats and Republicans to now get in a room and negotiate without asking the American people to pay the price. I'm very glad personally that after 6 months of going out on the floor time and time again and asking to go to budget conference 21 times before this, we are finally now in an agreement to work towards a bipartisan budget negotiation. The budgets that passed the House and the Senate 6 months ago are very different. There's no doubt about it. Nobody thinks it's going to be easy to get to a deal. But I will tell you, I would not have fought so hard for so long to get in a room with Chairman Ryan if I didn't think we could find common ground and work something out. I know that Democrats are willing to compromise to get a deal, and I'm hopeful Republicans will as well. Now that Republicans have seen the consequences of a government shutdown, I don't think they're going to be anxious to repeat this again. And now that it's clear that the debt limit is going to be raised and can't be used to extract political concessions, any future threats will ring hollow. So as we now head into the next phase, the budget conference, to have an actual negotiation, we will have a negotiation, not a hostage situation. I know there are budget changes Republicans want, and there are budget changes that we want. And I think we can now work together towards a deal that solves these problems from both sides. And I think for all of us, most importantly, stop lurching from crisis to crisis. So I'm very proud of the Senate tonight for working together and to stand up to end the pain of the American people and go to work on the bipartisan negotiations. And that we're finally going to do exactly what we said all along. We're going to open the government, we're going to pay our bills, and then we're going to sit down and we are going to negotiate.
Going to be not too many questions answered tonight. I want to go watch the ball game. Okay? Coming in, Dick.
Appropriations anomaly in this bill that was on the dam that's on the Ohio River contiguous with Illinois. Can you explain why?
I can answer that.
I can just tell you, I want to make.
And here we have Democratic senators there addressing reporters. That's after 2 votes were taken in the Senate to approve the short-term bill to end the partial government shutdown and to raise the debt ceiling, averting what many saw as a crisis here in the United States. We heard from Senator Chuck Schumer right at the beginning there. He is the senator from New York who said that what we have seen here was reckless political brinksmanship by Republicans, which must not be allowed to be repeated. We also heard from another senator who told us that the Republicans have seen the consequences and they will not want to go there again. Well, our two guests, let's go back to that news conference that the Democrats are holding. The Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, is addressing reporters right now. Let's listen in.
It was initiated in the 1930s. It's a replacement. So there's no need to point fingers at anyone other than we save the taxpayers tonight about $80 billion. It does nothing to the running up the deficit. It's in fact save the government money. You didn't mind if I answered your question, did you, Dick?
Did very well. Okay.
That's
You're meeting with Chairman Ryan tomorrow. What is your expectation from that?
I asked Chairman Ryan to meet with me tomorrow morning. We're just going to have breakfast and start to begin some conversations about how we move forward from here.
They're going to have breakfast at Tortilla Factory.
No. No, we are not.
Okay, good night. Good night, everybody.
Okay, those were Democratic senators there addressing the media after those 2 votes in the U.S. Senate, and both those votes were approved, as I'd mentioned, to pass a short-term bill to end the partial government shutdown, as well as to raise the debt ceiling. Our 2 guests are still here, Jack Burkman and Gabe Roth. Well, before we get to our guests, President Obama is now talking about the fast unfolding events on Capitol Hill. Let's listen into the White House.
Now voted to approve this agreement, and Democrats and Republicans in the House still have an important vote to take. But I want to thank the leaders of both parties for getting us to this point. Once this agreement arrives on my desk, I will sign it immediately. We'll begin reopening our government immediately. And we can begin to lift this cloud of uncertainty and unease from our businesses and from the American people. I'll have more to say about this tomorrow, and I've got some thoughts about how we can move forward in the remainder of the year and stay focused on the job at hand. Because there's a lot of work ahead of us, including our need to earn back the trust of the American people that's been lost over the last few weeks. And we can begin to do that by addressing the real issues that they care about. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm willing to work with anybody. I am eager to work with anybody, Democrat or Republican, House or Senate members, on any idea that will grow our economy, create new jobs, strengthen the middle class, and get our fiscal house in order for the long term. I've never believed that Democrats have a monopoly on good ideas, and despite the differences over the issue of shutting down our government, I'm convinced that Democrats and Republicans can work together to make progress for America. In fact, there are things that we know will help strengthen our economy that we could get done before this year is out. We still need to pass a law to fix our broken immigration system. We still need to pass a farm bill. And with the shutdown behind us and budget committees forming, we now have an opportunity to focus on a sensible budget that is responsible, that is fair, and that helps hardworking people all across this country. And we could get all these things done even this year if everybody comes together in a spirit of how are we going to move this country forward and put the last 3 weeks behind us. That's what I believe the American people are looking for, not a focus on politics, not a focus on elections, but a focus on the concrete steps that can improve their lives. That's going to be my focus. I'm looking forward to Congress doing the same. But once again, I want to thank the leadership for coming together and getting this done. Hopefully next time it won't be in the 11th hour. One of the things that I said throughout this process is we've got to get out of the habit of governing by crisis. And my hope and expectation is everybody has learned that there's no reason why we can't work on the issues at hand, why we can't disagree between the parties while still being agreeable, and make sure that we're not inflicting harm on the American people when we do have disagreements. So hopefully that's a lesson that will be internalized, and not just by me, but also by Democrats and Republicans, not only the leaders, but also the rank and file. Thanks very much, everybody.
President Obama there on this evening's events on Capitol Hill right here in Washington, where the senators passed 2 votes to end the partial government shutdown as well as raise the debt ceiling. President Obama there saying that he was thankful that the leadership in both parties had contributed towards ending this crisis. He mentioned the Democrats and Republicans. I still have with me our 2 guests, Jack Burkman, a Republican consultant, and Gabe Roth, a Democratic consultant. Jack, the president pointedly they're not playing the blame game, saying they were to blame for this or anything like that. Also, making a point of thanking both sides, not gloating over what has happened. You know, this has been a victory for him.
He's won. He knows he's won. I mean, he's been pointing the finger for several weeks, but now he knows he's won, so he's not going to use language like hostage and Republicans are holding the economy hostage and the government hostage. No, he knows he's won. Like I said, I think it's sad for the politics of Republicans because Boehner, had he kept his nerve and had he held out and had he held it together, I think they were heading for a big political victory in about 30 days, but they just had to hold on. But the Republicans couldn't do it. I think the Republican leadership in the House has just lost its nerve and has capitulated. And when you can't, when you get into these things, you have to be willing to see them through and stick it through, and they just can't.
So, Gabe, are the Democrats going to look at this as a major victory, or are they going to perhaps keep the rhetoric down a bit, knowing that they will have to negotiate with the Republicans at some point?
Yeah, of course, a negotiation is on the horizon. I mean, I definitely think that this is a victory for the Democrats, particularly Harry Reid in the Senate, and it demonstrated more than just a victory for one side or the other. It just demonstrated the dysfunction within the House Republican caucus. That when push comes to shove, it's still going to be a very fractured caucus, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge for Boehner to get his membership in line in order to get enough members together to negotiate with the Democrats moving forward. I mean, he still has the speakership. He's still the leader of the Republicans in the House, and it's up to him to figure out a way to keep the extreme elements of the party on the margin so he can move forward with the majority of the majority, as they like to call it, and negotiate with that majority of the majority with the Democrats in the House moving forward.
It might not surprise me if Boehner does not return as Speaker next year. I think you have an awful lot.
Pelosi will return as Speaker. So.
Well, no, next year. I won't get you excited about 2015, but next year, as in January 14. Even in January, it wouldn't surprise me. I think right about now you have a lot of angry conservatives. I think the Tea Party is very upset in the House at Boehner. And I think there's going to be a movement maybe to put Cantor in, maybe to put Paul Ryan in. We'll have to see. But I think December will be a very turbulent month for we Republicans.
But that was the very reason he held out for so long.
Right, but I think they wanted him. Others on the right wanted him to hold out. And there was a message being given to Boehner that this thing is winnable, but you've got to hold on. But I think just Boehner couldn't take the media pressure anymore. He just caved in. The Senate foisted this. You're right, it is a victory for Harry Reid and McConnell. The Senate got together and made themselves look like big boys and foisted this on the House, and they won the image game. They won the PR battle. I think all Boehner had to say was no. The Speaker, even if there were 230 votes or whatever this gets in the House tonight with Democratic support, I'll still want to see the vote. The vote in the House might be closer than everyone thinks.
Well, the votes in the Senate were pretty, I mean, 83-16, 81-18.
I don't think you'll see those margins in the House. I predict the House will be a lot closer. I'm not sure this is a foregone conclusion, but I think it'll pass, but I think it'll be close. I just think Boehner had the option to not bring this up. And I think he just should have said, we're not going to bring this up until we see the cuts we want.
Great point, Gabe. I mean, for the Democrats, it wasn't that hard, was it? All they had to do was sit back and say, you got to the Republicans, you got yourself into this, now get yourself out.
Well, I don't think it was that simple. I mean, I think that the Democratic conscience was such that, you know, we didn't want to default. We didn't want to, you know, the 200 or so members of the Democratic House and the 55 or so members of the Democratic Senate didn't want to be part of yet another fiscal crisis that would have been foisted on the American people should we have defaulted. So I think there was reason for them to want to negotiate and to reach a settlement without having to be, you know, it's already been called the Congress of constant chaos. It doesn't need to be called the Congress of a second economic meltdown as well. So Democrats wanted to reach a solution before the debt ceiling was breached.
Okay, I just want to have one final thing that I want to raise with both of you and get your responses, and that is, we hear a lot from the politicians about the fact that what has happened over the past 2 weeks, what has happened today, is good in one respect, is that everybody's seen the consequences. It's not going to happen again very quickly.
None of this is good in my view, because what it does is there's no fiscal discipline in the U.S. There was a chance through using this shutdown to enforce fiscal discipline, but in my mind there will be no fiscal discipline. I think the deficit will just continue to be a runaway freight train, and I just think we're on our way to becoming a European country, which is what Obama wants.
Okay. I mean, I would disagree strongly with that. I don't think that the president would want us to become a European country, though, you know, a few of them are nice to visit from time to time. I think what he wants is I think we have different definitions of what fiscal discipline is. I think that we in the Democratic Party want to bring revenues in line with any deficit reduction. The Republicans got their sequester last year. We're funding the government at sequester levels. You can take a victory lap. That's wonderful. But we also need to figure out ways to move the country forward in ways that help the middle class, and having you know, constant battles about, you know, who can cut the government to the smallest level possible so you can drown it in a bathtub doesn't help the folks out in Texas who don't have health care, or Arizona that are having trouble making ends meet. And those are the folks that we're trying to help here.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. No doubt lots more to say in the days ahead. Gabe Roth, Jack Burkman.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
for joining
you.
us.
Thanks for
Jack,
having us.
no holiday for you in France, right?
Nothing. Oh, they won't accept me there.
Right, let's
For
go.
good reason.